everyone, this is Mona back for the final day for our IMA for Beginners series. Today is day 4 and we will be covering maintenance in IMA. And as usual, I am recording this webinar. I'll post it out on the YouTube page and I will send out a link. I wanted to give you a heads up, I won't be sending that out until the morning because I do have to leave right after the webinar today. So in the morning, you will receive a link to the video and the PowerPoint. So if you could answer the following question using the chat, which maintenance task do you struggle with the most? So again, which maintenance task do you struggle with the most? So it could be doing change requests, such as adding vendor packs or adding new cartons, changing the available status. So just let me know which maintenance tasks do you struggle with the most using the chat, and I'll come back to this in a second. And just as a reminder, if you could please put your phone on mute when you're not speaking, that would be great. If you're listening through your computer, then please mute your computer's microphone. You can access that through Control Panel, Sound, and Recording tab. If you could put your cell phones on mute too, because I think 2 of the days so far this week we've had cell phones going off and playing music. So if you could put your cell phones on mute, that would be great as well. Please wait to audibly ask questions until designated times. We'll have that bubbly graphic, the blue one with the question mark. But please feel free to submit questions at any time using the chat. So I did ask a question, and it looks like I only got just a few responses. Sometimes I think they're a little slow coming in with the system. But I asked, what maintenance tasks do you struggle with the most? Heather said she hasn't really used the website yet except for the training videos and PowerPoint. So it sounds like you haven't even really been in IMA yet. And then Pat says going back to the previous screen after I save and close. And Lois said linking an existing item to a new item. Okay, so going back to the previous screen after you save and close, that's more of a navigation browser issue than it is with maintenance. So typically, I know when I used to work in the system, I would use the browser's backspace button, and that was usually how I navigated back to a previous screen. It won't undo whatever change you did as long as you saved it, but that was how I would typically go back. So just a navigation tip. And then as far as linking existing items to a new item, as I mentioned on Monday, the term linking actually means something completely different than what most of you probably think that it does. It's not where you add additional UPCs to a KSN, and that's what you as a vendor typically think of as linking. Linking is actually a very specific process that's owned and done only by inventory. So I think with linking, you're meaning adding a UPC to an existing KSN. So we are going to talk a little bit about adding new cartons, and that's what you're doing, adding new cartons or adding new eaches. And then also got understanding the relationship between item numbers, KSNs, and vendor pack number. I think a lot of that would have been covered more on the first day, day 1. So feel free to go back and review the video I sent out, and if you're still having some trouble understanding those relationships, you can always reach out to me at Vendor University at SearsHC.com or at help@SearsHC.com. Okay, thanks so much for some of your responses, and we are going to get started. Again, my name is Mona, and on Monday we covered IMA basics in terminology. And on Tuesday, we covered setting up new items in the new item grid, as well as the grid history feature. Day 3, we went over a lot of the IMA features that are offered, such as Quick Search, Changes tab, as well as some of these other task lists that you do have access to. And today, we are covering maintenance in IMA. We get a lot of questions from vendors. These are some of those, such as how do I add a new carton to an existing item? How do I change a carton configuration? How do I add a new vendor pack to an existing item? How do I duplicate an existing vendor pack? How do I add new ship points or use different ship points for different DCs? How do I update dimensions? So those are just a few of the questions that we do get from vendors. So today we are going to be covering UPC changes, carton configurations changes, new cartons, new vendor packs, ship point changes, and dimensions and weights changes. And through today, I'm going to be doing quite a large number of demos in the system for many of these topics. So first we're going to talk about UPC changes. So my item is operational with the incorrect UPC. How do I fix it? Really, the process for fixing it depends on your buyer and whether or not they want to keep that same KSN. Now, if your buyer wants to keep the same KSN, then inventory should strip the UPC and put the correct one back on. But if the buyer doesn't care about keeping that same KSN number, then you would sync over a new carton with your data sync provider as a vendor. Or if you do manual, you would create another package with the correct UPC. So any questions on UPC changes? That one's really short and sweet, down to how your buyer is wanting to manage that KSN. So any questions on UPC changes? Okay. Next then we're going to talk about carton configuration changes. There are a couple of reasons why you might want to update carton configurations. It could be that the original setup is incorrect, or maybe the original setup was correct and they've been doing orders, but your inventory or merchant wants additional options. They want additional assortment options. Maybe they've been doing the small, medium, large in a 2-2-2 pre-pack, and now they would like it in a 1-2-3 pre-pack. You would need a new carton configuration. So the process depends on whether it is in process still or if it's operational. If the carton is in process and it has the incorrect setup, then you can correct that on the grid in the vendor role. If you've already approved it past the vendor role, but it's still not operational, reach out to your merchant or your inventory analyst and ask them to return those items to you if they're not yet operational so that you can update the configuration to make it correct. Now, if the item's operational, typically those configurations cannot be changed on existing items. So if it has the wrong carton configuration and the item is operational, you need to sync over a new carton with the correct configuration. So I'm going to step into IMA now, and I'm just going to show you real quick how you would update the carton in a grid for an in-process item. Going into my grid, it's going to take a second to load. Now when you come into your grid, it has the default view for the empty required fields. But the carton configuration gets synced over with your item and it's populated, so it's not going to be in this default view. You're not going to find it like right here. So the package configuration is located on the package tab, so you would click packages, and the field name is called member quantity. So you would just come in here under member quantity, change this configuration. Let's say we want to do 2, 3, 2, 1. And then that's it. That's all you have to do to update the package configuration for an in-process item. It's going to be on your packages tab. You're not going to find it in that empty required field. So any questions about carton configuration changes? Okay. So next we're going to talk about new cartons. So one of the reasons you might need a new carton is that you have a change in your carton configuration. Another reason you might need a new carton is that you have a new vendor that's going to be supplying an existing item that's already built in IMA, or maybe you're going to have a promotional display, so you would need to build a new carton for that. Just remember, whenever you have a new carton, you also have to have a new vendor pack for that carton, or there's not going to be any way to order it. You actually won't be able to approve it. You will get a hard error until you add the vendor pack. So the most common errors when adding a new carton, your UPCs do not match the correct quantity. The carton dimensions do not align with each's, and vendor packs were not created for new exploding assortment members. So whenever you create a new carton, you have to have a new vendor pack. So you always have to create that new vendor pack. And if you're syncing over items, that new vendor pack will automatically sync over with your new carton. Whereas if you're building it manually, you're going to have to remember to add it manually instead. It takes an extra step. With your carton dimensions, so you have to keep in mind your eaches that you're placing into your carton. If you had a carton that's existing, and let's say it has 6 eaches in there, and you're doing a new carton that's going to have 8 of those eaches, those carton dimensions would not be the same exact dimensions. They wouldn't be the same width, height, and depth, or weight. There's going to have to be some changes there to account for those extra 2 eaches. So the process for new cartons depend on the type of carton that you're wanting to do, or the type of package. So if you need a new each package, each carton, uniform carton, or exploding assortment carton, you should be syncing those cartons over from your data sync provider. If you are a data sync vendor, you should not be creating them manually. You should be syncing them over. And like I mentioned, then the new vendor pack will automatically come over with those new cartons. Now if you do assorted cartons, mixed cartons, and pallet cartons, those cannot be synced over. They have to be built manually in IMA along with the corresponding vendor pack. Also, you may just be a vendor who hasn't switched over to data sync yet, and you just do, let's say, uniform cartons or exploding assortment cartons. In those instances, you would have to build it manually if you're not set up with the data sync provider, but we do encourage you to get set up with a data sync provider. So I am going to, that being said, there are instances, let's say, where you don't do data sync, or you need something right here, right now, and your data sync just isn't working properly and you can't get it synced over and you're on a really tight deadline, and you might have to build them manually. So I'm actually going to walk you through building a new uniform carton for an existing item and building a new carton, like a new exploding assortment carton for existing eaches. So first we're going to do the uniform carton. So we're adding this to an existing KSN. So I'm going to do a quick search for that KSN. And then I'm going to go to the Packages tab. So from the Packages tab, UCRT is already selected from this drop-down. UCRT stands for Uniform Carton. So I'm going to click Add Package. And I have to complete some information. So I'm going to go grab my G10 really quick. Okay. So you enter your shipping G10 first. It's already going to have the division selected for you. And then you have to select your vendor DUNS. Now many of you will probably just have the drop-down, but I have to search for it since it's the super user. Whoops, thought I was typing it in. 1 second. Okay. And make sure that you do select the order DUNS and not the pay DUNS. So once you select that, you'll see the category is already selected for you, and then you just have to select the correct subcategory. Once you've completed that information, you can click Add Package. And so now you should be seeing the packages page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to enter a description. And then you may notice that there is no UPC displaying here yet for what's going into that uniform carton. So with this drop down next to member marking number, you need to select the each and then click add. So once you've added your UPC, then you need to update the quantity. So I'm going to update the quantity to 10. And then you need to enter your number of inners. Let's say in this example, I'm not really going to have any inners. I'm just going to put all the genes into the same box. In that instance, each gene would count as an inner, so I'm going to enter 10. Now, watch the total eaches and the eaches per inner when I click Save. It's going to automatically update those. So now you can see it's 10, 1, 10. So we have 10 eaches, and each of those is counted as an inner, so there's 10, and it's 1 per inner. Now, let's say that I'm actually going to have 2 inners in this carton. So if I enter 2 and click Save, it's going to update it again. So now it's 10, 5, 2. I have a total of 10 eaches. There's 5 eaches per inner, and there's 2 inners. So 2 times 5 is 10. Whatever you enter in the number of inners filled, it needs to be divisible, the total quantity needs to be divisible by the number of inners. If I were to enter something like 3 for a total package quantity of 10, that's not going to work. 3 times 3 is 9. It's not 10. So when I were to go to approve this, I would actually get a hard error until I went back and resolved this. So for now, I'm going to go back and enter 10 again. Okay. From there, you want to enter your dimensions and your weights. So I'm going to enter 18. And then if you scroll further down, there we go, you can see the weight filled. So again, you have to take into account I calculated these before I got in the webinar today. So I looked at the dimensions for a single each and the weight for a single each. And then since I'm doing 10, I had to make sure that these calculations made sense for the carton, putting 10 eaches into the carton. Once you've completed that information, you can click Save. And then you can go to Workflow tab. You can select Check for Errors, and then click the Check for Error Submit Workflow Task button. So here you can see we got a hard error. The hard error that we got is that a vendor pack is missing. So since we created that new uniform carton, we do need to create a vendor pack to actually approve it. So we will be coming back to this to add a vendor pack in a few slides. But first, I next want to show you how to do an exploding assortment carton. So to do an exploding assortment carton, you're going to hover over Create, and you're going to click Exploding Assortment. Let me go grab my shipping G10 again. Okay. So you're going to enter your shipping G10. There we go. And then you have to select your division category and subcategory. These are not pre-selected because it does not yet know what eaches you're putting into this exploding assortment. Again, you do also have to select your vendor information. And then you can select your category and your subcategory. So once you've entered this information, you can click Add Package. Here it's asking what type of package you're looking to create. We're going to leave it to the default, which is carton, because we're creating an exploding assortment. So we're going to now click Create Package. Okay, so now that we've created the package, we have to enter a description for the package. Now you don't have to enter brand because brand is not required for cartons. It's only required at the each level. You'll see it does not have that red asterisk. You do have to answer the EAS tag required indicator and vendor applied EAS tag fields. We're going to choose no, and then we're going to click save. Okay, so one of the first things you may notice is that there's not actually anything in this carton yet. We have no eaches in this carton. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add those eaches. So on the left side, you'll see the Search for Assorted Members button. You're going to click that, and it pops up in a new window, and we're going to search for the KSNs that we would like to add. So once you find the KSN, you can select it under the Action column, and then you can click Add Members. And we're going to repeat that process until we get all of the KSNs that we're wanting to add. And I'm going to do one more. Okay, so now I have all of my eaches that I want to put into this exploding assortment. Oh, and I did get a good question from Ebony. She's asking, you have to add the members individually, no way to add multiple KSNs to the assortment. There is. So if we go back to the Search for Assorted Members button, I was searching specifically by single KSNs. And the reason why I was doing that is because in the training environment, I found using some of the other fields, it clocks for a really long time. And since I'm doing the webinar, it gets kind of awkward if I'm just sitting there waiting for it to do its search. So that's why I was entering in just the KSN number and doing it one by one. Even though I'm doing them individually on the call and in the training environment, it works faster and there's a little bit less dead time. Now you could search by KSN description, the marking number, or the G10, or sorry, marking number is the G10, or the vendor stock number. If you're wanting to add multiple KSNs for an assortment at a single time, I think your vendor stock number might be your best bet depending on how you utilize that vendor stock number. I know a lot of times vendors will put most items that are going into a carton on the same vendor stock number. Some may not. That's all on how you manage it. So otherwise, you might find the KSN description to be helpful as well. But it'll find it super quick if you enter a specific KSN because it's looking for something very specific then versus something broader and more general. So does that answer your question, Ebony? Sort of. Okay, and then I did get another question. So we need to create each UPC prior to creating the carton and then add each UPC to that carton. Yeah, Pat, I remember you are strictly manual entry. So what I'm showing right now is how to create an additional new carton for existing KSNs. So if you were doing this from scratch completely, you would first have to create those each KSNs or those each packages, and then you could add those to your carton. In December, I'm hoping to launch the manual setup webinar, and we're going to go through from start to finish, working from scratch to build those manual cartons. And I think that'll clear a lot of things up for you. But so it's kind of similar, except you're starting from scratch, so you don't have any KSNs or eaches to work with if you're doing it strictly manually. Like I said, the process I'm doing is for creating a new configuration carton for existing KSNs. And I did get, thanks for the clarification, Ebony. So she says, I was just wondering if it is one at a time or if I could do 10 and then add them to the exploding assortment at one time. I could do 10. So are you doing manual entry completely as well, Ebony, or do you use data sync? I think maybe that's where my confusion is. Okay, so if you're doing data sync, you are most likely syncing all this information over and you're not having to do this manually, but there could be the rare instance where you may need to do it manually as a data sync vendor if you're having, let's say if their system is down and you have a really tight deadline. And so that's why I'm just walking through it, just so you can get familiar with it. And you can always save the video link and then come back if that situation does happen where you need to do that, and reference it. Or you could always reach out to the help desk as well. But if you're doing data sync, you will probably be syncing this information over. I was just walking through for the rare occasion where you might need to be doing it manually. So you would probably already have the eaches over. I don't know if that clears it up for you at all, or if that just makes things a little more confusing. You can feel free to reach out to the vendor university at SearsHC.com email. Maybe I need some more details or information to fully understand what you're asking. So I'm going to go ahead and move on for now. Okay, good. So it sounds like you're good now. Okay. So after you add all of your eaches to your exploding assortment carton, you need to update the package configuration in the quantity field right here. And then if you scroll down, you need to enter the dimensions and weights. So again, I went and looked at the eaches beforehand and calculated what the appropriate dimensions and weights would be. And oh, I did want to show you, so once you click Save, you can go to the Workflow tab again, and everything should go through fine except for that missing vendor pack. So here we see, again, this is missing the vendor pack. And we are going to come back to doing vendor packs in just a couple of slides. So any more questions about new cartons? So again, if you're doing data sync, you should be syncing over those new cartons. However, if you do cartons that can't be synced over, or if your data sync operator is down for some reason, you can do it manually. So I went through the process of adding a new uniform carton or a new exploding assortment for existing eaches. Okay, so we're going to move on to new vendor packs then. So I touched on this Monday, but I know I was running out of time at the end, so I did want to go over this again. My merchant or inventory analyst has requested that I create a new vendor pack for an existing item. Why would I need to create a new vendor pack? Some of the reasons that you might need to create a new vendor pack include a new flow type. If you previously had set up for DC, they may now want the option of ordering through DSD, so you would need a new vendor pack for that new flow type. Or additional store format. If your product has been selling in Kmart and they want to start selling it in Sears, you will need a new vendor pack for Sears. If it's a different vendor, and this could be a couple of different scenarios. It could be that vendor A has been supplying a product and now they're going to discontinue supplying it, but vendor B is going to come in and they're going to start supplying that same exact product. In that instance, they would need a new vendor pack. Another example, there are some products such as the disposable plastic bottles of water that comes in the big packs, the 12 or 24 packs. We cannot get our supply for that from a single vendor. They just can't cover the demand. So we use multiple vendors for that item, and so each vendor that's supplying that same exact item would have their own vendor pack. Another reason why you might need an additional vendor pack, if you have a change in your carton configuration, which can sometimes go along with having a new each or member, then you would need a new vendor pack. So Pat just asked a question, what if there are multiple ratios for the same style? Do I need to create a new vendor pack for each ratio? Yes, you do. So for every carton, so in each carton will have its own ratio or pre-pack. There's a few different terms you can use for that. Every carton has to have its own vendor pack. One, the system won't even let you approve it without the vendor pack. Two, there's no way to order that new carton configuration if it doesn't have a vendor pack. So anytime that you have a new carton, you do require a new vendor pack. However, keep in mind, you can sometimes do a new vendor pack even when there's not a new carton. Sometimes you just need a new vendor pack for an existing carton, such as a new flow type, or the additional store format, or the different vendor. Or the last option, more than one cost. An example where you might have more than one cost on an item could be if you have been supplying an item in the 48 continental states and we would like to start selling it in Puerto Rico or Hawaii. In those instances, that cost is probably going to go up, so it would need its own vendor pack. So does that answer your question, Pat? Kinda. I mean, you can elaborate if you'd like to, or you can always email Vendor University as well and elaborate to maybe provide some screenshots or some KSNs. That's always really helpful when you can provide some KSNs or G10s for us to actually go in and look at. So some of the most common errors when adding a new vendor pack, it could be that your desired ship point isn't available for you to select, or maybe the DUNS number is not set up for the correct format. They would like for you to select Sears, but you don't see Sears as an option. Or maybe the DUNS number isn't set up for the correct flow. So if you have been shipping DC for a long time and now they want you to set up a DSD flow type, maybe that's not available in your drop-down. So if those are issues where you don't have the flow type available or you don't have the format available, you can email vendmain@searshc.com because you will have to get that information added to your DUNS. I would also confirm with your buying or inventory team that that is what they actually want. And they may actually put in the request for the information to be added to your DUNS. It could go either way. They could put in the request, or you can email VinMain directly. Okay, and real quick, I just want to look at Pat's question one more time because she did give some more information. When I'm creating multiple ratios for the same style, do I need to add an extension? I'm not sure what you mean by extension, so you can tell which prepack is being ordered. The extension to the style. No, most of our inventory analysts, they look at that KSN and the G10s. They don't really care that much about the vendor stock number. That's more for you as the vendor to keep track of your items. So again, inventory cares more about the KSN number and the UPC number for tracking what they're ordering and the inventory. So they don't look at your vendor stock number for that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. If you have some additional questions with that, let's take that offline. I want to make sure that I get through the material because I still have quite a bit to get through today. So with your new vendor pack process, if you use data sync, new vendor packs should be synced over with the existing UPC. So like I said, if you're just doing a new vendor pack and no new carton, then you're going to sync over that new vendor pack with the existing UPC. Now, if you set items up manually, then you have to either add or duplicate a vendor pack from the vendor pack tab in IMA. And I'm going to switch back over to IMA so I can show you an example of that. So we're going to go back to that uniform carton that I created. Okay. And you're going to go to the vendor pack tab after you do a quick search for the item. And then from here, we're going to click the Add Vendor Pack button up at the very top. So before I click that, this existing vendor pack that's here, this is for the each package. But if you remember, we added a uniform carton, so that uniform carton needs its own vendor pack. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add Vendor Pack. And then this blank page pops up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the uniform carton because that's what I'm making the new vendor pack for. So the one with UCRT. And then I'm going to enter my vendor information. Again, make sure you select your order DUNS. If you select the pay DUNS number, you're not going to have any options to select for flow type. So you may think that there is an issue with your DUNS, but really you maybe just selected the wrong one. So make sure you did select your order DUNS. And then you're going to select your flow type. We're going to select DC for this example. And then we're going to select Kmart for our primary store format. Then we're going to move on down the page. Here we have to select the projected first in-store date. So again, this is used a lot for like prioritization and for informational purposes. I don't think it actually affects anything directly. So just take your best guess at the in-store date. It's not something you need to spend days trying to wait to hear back from your merchant. They can always update it in their role if they want to. Then you're going to enter a vendor stock number. Again, you own the vendor stock number, so that's for you to work with grouping your items and make them easier to find, putting similar items together. The buying and merchant teams use the KSN, sometimes the G10s, or if it's a Sears item, they'll use the core item number for keeping track of items. Next, you enter your order quantity multiple and your order quantity unit of measure. And then over on the right side of the screen, you'll see the California Proposition 65 questions. You may remember that from Tuesday when we were completing the new item grid. When you would hover over the question headings, it would pop out with the question so you could read it. But here you can read it without having to hover over anything. So you just want to answer those. We're going to choose no and no. Then if you scroll further down the page, here you will see tier groups. So the tier group that you have for your items is defaulted based upon the hierarchy of your item setup and the flow type that you selected. Whichever tier group it is, it'll explode out down here. So you see Regional Specialty Center has been exploded out, and you can see the DC locations, Mira, Loma, and Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, are both selected. Those are the DC locations that fall under the RSC tier. And you need to select a ship point for each of those DC locations as well as your vendor cost. Now some of these tier groups can have maybe 4, 5, or 6 DC locations. So instead of selecting them for every single DC location, you can scroll back up to this tier groups box right here, and you can select your ship point here and enter your cost and click Apply to All. And it'll come up with a confirmation message wanting to make sure that you want to apply it to all the fields below, and you're going to click OK. So now if we scroll down, you'll see that it applied that information to all of these DCs. It's not a big deal if you only have 2, but if you have 4 or 6, it can get old after a while selecting them all individually. So you may find the tier groups box right here very useful. Also keep in mind your vendor cost. So since this is a carton, it's a uniform carton, the vendor cost is not going to be the same as your each. One second, please. Okay, my voice was starting to go out. I had to get a drink of water. So your carton cost is not going to be the exact same as your each cost. So this is a uniform carton, and the each cost was $9.25, and there's 10 of the eaches in this carton. So that means that the carton cost is going to be 10 times the cost of each individual unit. So it's going to be $92.50. If you try to enter the exact same cost as the individual unit, you will most likely run into a hard error when you try to approve it. So from here, you completed all of your information. You would click Workflow, only you forgot to save. So, and I wanted to do this to give a call out because normally in most programs that you work in, like Microsoft Word or Excel, if you forget to save something and you go to exit, it comes up with a message and it asks you if you want to save. And so your default mode is just to click yes. It's to click OK or yes, because that's what you're used to answering in those programs. This one is a little bit backwards. This one's saying you made changes. Do you want to continue without saving? So if you go into default mode and you click OK without thinking, you're actually going to lose all of the information that you just entered since the last time you saved. So in order to save, you have to actually click Cancel and then click Save. So I always like to point that out though, because it's always extremely frustrating when you spend time working on something and then lose the changes that you made. So make sure that you do Cancel out of that box and then click Save. And now we can go to the Workflow tab, and we're going to check for errors. And we didn't get any errors. We did get a warning. You'll see this here. Anytime you have a warning, you can ignore warnings. They don't have to be resolved. So if you just get a warning, you can click Approve and then click Submit and ignore warnings. Now, if this needed attention from you, if it required some sort of change before it could go through, then under Type, it would say Error in red. But since it says Warning, we're going to go ahead and click Submit and ignore warnings. Okay, so that very first carton we made, that uniform carton, we added a vendor pack, and we were able to approve it through the vendor role. So now it's past your row, and it would be in the merchant role, waiting for them to complete their part of setup and approve that on through. So that's how you add a vendor pack from scratch. Another option you have for creating manual vendor packs is duplicating vendor packs. So we are going to go to Quick Search and do a quick search for a KSN. And then we're going to click the Vendor Pack tab. So before we clicked this Add Vendor Pack button at the top, now we're going to click instead, we're going to click the hyperlink for the vendor pack number and go inside of the existing vendor pack. Now we're going to click the Duplicate Vendor Pack button. From here in that first drop down, you're going to select Sears, Kmart, or both. We're going to go with Kmart. And then we're going to select our vendor information. After you select your vendor information, you can select your flow type, and we're going to choose DSD this time. Last time we did DC. And then you can select your primary store format. Finally, I'm going to scroll over to the right. There we go. Under the package field, you're going to select the package, and you're going to click Create Duplicates. Now you have multiple lines down there, so if you needed to create a, let's say you needed to create a vendor pack for DSD, and you needed to create a vendor pack for Sears, you can actually create multiple vendor packs or duplicate multiple vendor packs at the same time, just going down line by line. So this is our new vendor pack that we just created. We do have to do a few things to it. So if you click into the hyperlinked vendor pack number, one of the first things, if you scroll down, you'll notice that the projected first insert date is back in 2010. Now this will give you a hard error. The insert date cannot be any older than 3 months in the past. So we're going to click that, and we're going to click or select a more updated date. You can click the Today button on the calendar to make it today. I'll select something in December. And then you also have to select your California Prop 65 questions, or you have to answer them. So again, I'm going to choose no and no. Now since this is a DSD vendor pack, when we scroll down, you'll see that's it. There aren't any DC locations. You don't have to select ship points. You don't enter the cost per DC location either. In fact, your cost is actually located up here. If this was a DC vendor pack or another vendor pack that uses DCs, then you would have to scroll down like we did in the previous one, and you would have to select your ship points and add the cost for each of the DC locations. So once you've completed that information, you can click Save, and then you can go to Workflow tab and check for errors and approve. We're not going to do that again this time since we've done it a few times already. But that's how you can duplicate a vendor pack. So we've gone over adding a vendor pack and duplicating a vendor pack and walking through it manually. Don't forget, if you do data sync, it's easier to data sync the new vendor packs over. When you data sync them over, they will be in your new item task list. They'll be indicated by OPR new, and you can just put those on a grid. I think you have to select your ship point. I'm not sure. I think you have to select your insert date, and I don't think there's much beyond that you would have to select in the new item grid, and then you can just approve it. And when you do that, you can drop down that information. If you remember, you can drop down information from eaches to eaches, and that way you're not entering it multiple times for multiple items. It can save you time, be more efficient. So any questions about adding or duplicating new vendor packs? Okay, then we're going to go on to new ship points. So there's a few reasons why you might want to change your ship points. Could be that your shipping location has closed, or it could be that you would like to adjust the route for a better deal. For example, you want to use different ship points for different DCs. If we have a DC in Pennsylvania and we have a DC in California, you may not want us to pick up from your warehouse in New Jersey for our California DC. You may have a warehouse out in California as well. So you can set it so that the California DC is picking up product from your California warehouse, and the Pennsylvania DC is picking up product from your New Jersey warehouse. So the most common errors when changing a ship point is selecting the incorrect ship point, or your desired ship point isn't available. It's not in that drop-down. So if your ship point is not in that drop-down list, you will have to submit a request through the vendor portal. So on the vendor portal, if you click IMA up at the top and then scroll down the page a little bit, you will see this ship point changes section. Right here it says click here to add, change, or remove a ship point. So if you click that link, it's going to take you to a form. You complete the information on the form and submit, and they will get that ship point added to your DUNS. Now keep in mind this update is not instantaneous. It does take a few days, and they will email you to let you know when it is available to select. So this is a high-level overview of, well, it's not really high-level, but it kind of goes into some detail, but it goes over changing a ship point. I'm actually going to pass through these slides and get to the demo so that we can actually walk through the demo. But you do have that in your PowerPoint that I'll be sending out, so you can refer back to that. I would rather go through it in the demo for you. So we're going to go back to Quick Search, and we're going to search for our item that we want to change the ship points for. So from there, we're going to click the Vendor Pack tab. And then from here, we're going to click into the Vendor Pack number hyperlink. And then we're going to scroll down the page. So above the tier group section, there's a little box that you can select next to change DC locations. So you would select that box, change DC locations, and then click Create Change Request. So on this page, this is where you can update your ship points. If you just want to, let's say your location changed and you just want to change the ship point for all of the DC locations, you could select it here and then click Apply to All and then click OK. And it would apply it to all of your, it would apply that ship point to all of the DCs. But let's say you want to use different ship points for different DCs. Under Kmart tier group, or if you have a Sears item, it could be Sears tier group, you're going to explode that tier group out by clicking the plus sign. Then I'm going to scroll down. And here you can see this is your old value, the one that's on the top, it's labeled old. And then the one labeled new is the one that it's going to be changed to. So let's say for that first item, we want to do the Carson, California location. And for the second item, we want to do Bayonne, New Jersey. So now for our Mira Loma location, we're going to be picking up product at the Dayton, New Jersey. And then for the Pennsylvania location, we're going to be picking up product from Bayonne, New Jersey. Okay, so maybe for the Mira Loma, it would make more sense to pick it up from Carson, California. But anyways, you can select different ship points for the different DCs. Then you would just click Save and go to Next. And that's going to load the Workflow tab. And then you can check for your errors. Most likely you won't get any errors. There's a warning, like I said. You can ignore the warnings. And then you would click Approve and Submit. So any questions about your ship point changes? Okay, then we're going to move on to dimensions and weights. Oh, okay, so I just got a question from Pat about ship points. What if you need to change the ship point after? So what I just showed you, that was what you would do to do a change request for your ship point. I think I did forget to mention, if you want to do different ship points for different DCs, then you have to originally select just one ship point for your DCs and wait for it to go operational before you can select a different ship point. Okay, so you're actually asking if you can change it after the purchase order, after you received the purchase order through EDI. That I have no idea. I don't work with EDI at all, and I'm not in transportation. I would recommend first reaching out to your EDI contact, and then maybe your logistics contact. And I don't know if you know those or not. You can, okay, sounds like you do. If not, you can always reach out to vendors at SearsHC.com and ask for that contact information, and they can direct you to that. But yeah, I'm not sure of, I don't work in logistics and I don't work with EDI, so I'm not sure of the timing of that. Okay, so there are a few reasons why you might want to do changes for your dimensions and weights. Could be that your items are so old that they're wrong. Either the item itself has changed, the look of the item, and it is a different dimensions and weight now than what it was when you set it up. Or if you set the item up in our system a long time ago, we didn't used to have any rules in place for dimensions and weights. Another reason you might want to change them is that you add a new carton with the correct dimensions and weights, but the eaches are now wrong because they weren't correct to begin with. So if you remember when we added the new uniform carton and when we created that new exploding assortment carton, we had to take into account the eaches and their dimensions and weights. But if they were originally wrong, or maybe it's just changed since then, you may have to go back and do a change request for the dimensions for your eaches. So the most common errors when changing dimensions and weights is creating the change but forgetting to approve. And the second one is calculating the cube incorrectly. I know a lot of vendors do struggle with calculating that cube. And if you're struggling with it, I know I talked to one person, it might have been Ebony, she had like a lot of UPCs, like over 80 eaches of different dimensions and weights. They were not the same dimensions and weights going into a single carton. And yeah, she said it was her. That can get super confusing. So my recommendation was to maybe put it out in a spreadsheet and have the dimensions and weights for an item on each item gets its own line, and then you can put the quantity for that specific item that's going into that. And that would be the only way I think I could keep it straight, because having over 80 items of different quantities and each one dimensions and weights would be very confusing to figure out your carton. So that might be something you might consider if you have a really complicated setup. Otherwise, hopefully, it'll be much simpler than that. So to update your dimensions and weights, if you have each packages, each cartons, uniform cartons, and exploding assortment cartons, and you use data sync, you should sync over those new dimensions and weights from your data sync provider. Because if you're doing it from your data sync provider, you're not only correcting it in IMA, but you're going to have it correct from your data sync provider when they push that information out to any other retailer that you work with. If you do assorted cartons, mixed cartons, and pallet cartons, those cannot be synced over, and you do have to update them manually in IMA. So we did talk on Monday about the exemption rules. So if an item is stacked, nested, or compressed, so if it's maybe pillows going into a box where you can compress them down, or chairs, they're being kind of nested into each other when they're stacked, you can use the dimension exception indicator. So you change it on the eaches on the package tab. You don't have to do it for the carton. Now if you're just doing a single item, it's easiest to just go into the package tab directly to make the change. But if you're doing it for multiple items, you probably want to use the changes grid to do that change request. And we're getting close on our time, so I'm going to go through this quickly, but it is in the PowerPoint that I will be sending out in the morning. So to do it on a single item, again, you click the Packages tab, and then you're going to select that box next to Dimension Exception Indicator, and click Create Change Request. Now you can do a similar process if you need to update the actual dimensions, because you'll see that all of the dimensions and weights and the Dimension Exception Indicator fields, they're all grouped together, so they all came into this change request page. So this is how you could also update your dimensions or weights. For your Dimension Exception Indicator, you would select Yes from that drop-down, and then click Save and go to Next. It's going to load the Workflow tab, and you would approve through the workflow. Now if you're doing it on multiple items, you can do it through the Changes grid by selecting the Dimension Exception Indicator. I highlighted it in red there. And then entering your criteria, such as KSNs or GTINs, and clicking Create Grid. It's going to bring that up in your default view. You can select Yes for that very first line, and then copy it down to everything else, and then Approve. Now you cannot change your dimensions and weights on the grid. You can only change your Dimension Exception Indicator. So if you need to do your dimensions and weight changes manually, if you can't sync those over, then I do recommend that you go to the Package tab, select the box to do the change request. So any questions about dimensions and weights? And I did see your comment, Ebony. If you would send me an email to vendoruniversity@searshc.com, I will get that sent out to you. I should have sent to everyone that attended yesterday, so I apologize that you didn't get that. But it'll be in the morning before you get that, because I do have to leave after the webinar is over today. Okay, so I'm going to go over some key points to remember from today's session. If a carton configuration is incorrect, you must create a new carton with the correct configuration. And a new carton always requires a vendor pack. However, a new vendor pack does not necessarily require a new carton. It is best practice to sync over new cartons and vendor packs rather than creating them manually, although sometimes that is required. Before fixing an incorrect UPC, communicate with your buyer to determine whether the same KSN is required. And then finally, you must wait until an item is operational before you can select different ship points for different DCs. So I am going to be sending out a survey link with the video and PowerPoint in the morning. We would really, really love to get your feedback. We want to know what we're doing right, how we can improve. This is still pretty new. We just switched over from on-site to doing this via webinar in September. So we really want to know how it's working and what changes we can make to it. So please take some time to complete the survey. I would really appreciate it. So at this point, I know we're over time. I will hang on the line for at least another 5 minutes or until everyone's done asking questions. Feel free to go, but also feel free to email vendoruniversity@searshc.com with any questions, and I will be sure to get back to you. Have a great day, and I will be on the line for a bit.